Good morning and happy Monday. Welcome to the morning meeting. I am Dan Turrentine, joined by my esteemed colleague, our DC correspondent, Mr. Spicer. Happy Monday, Sean.
I cannot believe I still have a perfect bracket. It is astonishing me how well I've called this.
You
Never
you you
before.
are that one person. All right.
I kept going. I normally would have picked UConn this year. Something inside of me said, I don't know. So again, it's pretty amazing how it's perfect. But maintained it.
You're
Good
just
luck
not
going.
tired of winning. Not
No,
yet.
no, 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 no. Big
Our
fingers crossed going forward.
our European consultant, known as Mark Halperin, may or may not be joining in. He is currently on the move between the continent and the small city of London. So we will see if Mark joins us. But as always, we will go through the president's and main folks schedule for the day, and then look at the day book, and then jump into it. So first thing up here, the White House pool, always interesting, always entertaining. Sean, does anything jump out at you here?
Well, the two things that are interesting is one on the print, it's the Griot, right? That's a largely black publication. Normally, I think they are part of the White House correspondence, but again, this goes back to the counter narrative that the White House is kind of getting rid of folks. In fact, you can see them, the left still playing in there. Gray TV is an affiliate of TV organizations, kind of like Sinclair. And then the Daily Signal, obviously the new media seat for today. And our friends from Britain occupying the radio seat.
So democracy is still alive, at least to start the week here, based on the pool.
Right.
So the to go into the president's schedule here, he's got a somewhat limited schedule. The day really starts primarily at 2 p.m. when he hosts the governor of Louisiana to make remarks, followed by a Greek Independence Day celebration. Sean, any insight on what he's up to with the governor of Louisiana?
The only thing, at least that's obvious, I didn't spend any capital this morning pushing it. The Supreme Court is taking up a Louisiana redistricting case this morning, and could possibly be that they're going to talk about something of that effect. I don't know. Nothing jumps out at me that's obvious otherwise.
Okay. And then, as usual, the vice president, the most effective and influential vice president, once again, has no public schedule that we know of. Ukraine and Russia, the ceasefire talks are continuing in Saudi Arabia. We'll get to that here in a second. Congress back in town after a wild recess week. Usually those are quiet, but not these days, not really for either party. And we'll talk about that. And then, as Sean mentioned, the Supreme Court is going to hear a Louisiana redistricting case. Look, when you have a majority of only 3 or 4 seats, redistricting cases can become quite material and impact. Just one seat could end up making the difference next November. So, with that,
By the way,
and
keep in
Mark,
mind that we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, but April 1st, 3 big races: the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin, which I don't feel too high on right now, but then there's 2 Florida races, the 1st and the 6th, which will get Republicans 2 seats back, the Gates seat and the Waltz seat. So I just say that because we're in the countdown phase between when Speaker Johnson's got a little more wiggle room.
and it's not on here, but just quickly, that Wisconsin Supreme Court race, for folks who aren't following closely, I mean, it is turning into a little bit of a mini showdown here. Elon Musk has plowed millions of dollars into it through his super PAC. Donald Trump just jumped in to endorse the candidate. Democrats are plowing money. In these special elections after a wave election like we had in November, both parties really try to create momentum. Republicans to say we're still on offense, we've won again in a blue wall state. Democrats to say, like, hey, we're turning the tide, things are better than it may feel in DC. Sean, do Republicans feel a little nervous? Do they feel confident? Do you have any sense?
So I ran incumbent retention for the NRCC over back in the day and oversaw special elections. And I used to say special elections are special. Like, I've never read too much into them one way or the other. You could have a blowout. It's all about turnout. And so like in the Wisconsin race, I think that there's a feeling, generally speaking, that we're a little behind for obvious reasons, demographically and just turnout wise and momentum wise. in the 1st and the 6th in Florida. Again, I think you're going to see Randy Fine and Jimmy Patronis be the next 2 members of Congress from Florida. That being said, I'm not too concerned. There is a lot of money in there. It's a low turnout race. It's not like I'm sitting around, if Patronis wins by 12 versus 20, it's not going to make me feel like it's never going to move. Like it's not going to be something that Dems target in the future going forward once you get into a general election. So I know the Democrats, and I get why they would do it. Don't get me wrong. If I got within, 10 of what would be normal, I would say that, wow, this is a huge sign for us. They need something to get their members excited about.
Exactly. It'll help with fundraising. It'll help with candidate recruitment for Democrats. Any silver lining is badly needed. Mark, you have joined us briefly. How are you? That's what I get for asking him. All right. Well, we may be losing Mark kind of intermittently here. So let's go to our first topic, the update on the Ukraine and Russia talks. As I mentioned, the negotiation teams are meeting in Saudi Arabia. There was kind of news over the weekend here about the Russians kind of dragging their feet a little bit and wanting more concessions. Sean, what is your sense of where we stand as a next round of negotiations start?
I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't think that there's been that much that's developed. I think the Europeans are trying to figure out where they stand, what they can put forward. Steve Witkoff, the special envoy out there over the weekend, trying to get the conditions right. Look, I mean, I think I don't see a ton of movement in the last 7 days, but I also think a lot of this is happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing that I just flag, and this is what, yours truly and others said a couple of weeks ago, is the Russians seem to want more concessions. And this is why people were so worried about Trump leaning so hard on Zelensky so early. Trump got a bunch of concessions from Ukraine. And now the Russians are like, great, that is the starting point, not the end point. We want more. And so I think, as you say, Sean, cautiously optimistic that Trump can land this plane and bring an end to the war that's, going to provide lasting peace and for Ukraine to remain one. But, we will see here.
I think we said this before, but I know for all of us who watch this stuff and are junkies, you want an update like every 10 seconds. I think we'll, in a month or whatever, we'll know whether or not it worked. And the other thing is, with respect to Russia, in terms of concessions, it's all going to be out there. So everyone will be a judge on their own, whether or not it was a deal or not deal. The one thing that I think is funny is, I was reading, I had a hard copy of the New York Times, and I thought, hey, it's Sunday, I'll flip through it. Some interesting article. I mean, it was sort of like the flyer, the flyer you get during the DNC that's all about like but the one thing that was so funny is they keep talking about how Trump was going to give away this or that. And I'm like, tell me a realistic scenario in which parts of Ukraine didn't end up in Russia, that's where you had a negotiated peace. I mean, there's certain realities that some people still won't get their head wrapped around that I think is somewhat funny.
Yeah. And I will say, because I've been, skeptical of Trump, one thing to flag here, and, Mark, you've talked about this a lot, is the Europeans do appear to be getting more serious about their own common defense. And I think Germany approved over the weekend the biggest expenditure on arms since the Second World War. People may have, that may make people feel good or bad, but Trump's, desire for Europe, and frankly, America's desire for Europe to take more responsibility, he does seem to be making material progress, and that is good in the long run for Europe and for us. So,
a stronger Europe is good for Europe. It's good for us. It's good for the world. So these things where they're going to spend more money, not just Germany, but France and the UK in particular, talking about this, is good for the world. The more that these guys actually fulfill their own commitments and look after themselves, make up less dependent on us, that's good.
Yeah. So, switching topics here, for those, I think it was flagged on Friday's show, hat tip to the community member who raised it for us. But Howard Lutnick sat down with the All In podcast. Several members, Scott Bassett earlier in the week, I forget which podcast, but the the administration, Sean, appears to be following the campaign's strategy of sitting down with alternative media sources for these much longer form interviews. It worked well in the campaign. This is really new ground for an administration to do this. Sean, what can we learn from these interviews that Team Trump is doing?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to echo what you said, Dan, to the community. I listened. I didn't get to I got to part of the Bessett one. I've almost finished with the Lutnick one. So, for those guys in the chat or whatever, when you come on, you share ideas. Like, Mark's obviously I don't want to speak for him, but two of the three of us, at least known, followed up on that, and it was a really good interview. So thank you for those suggestions. And what I think is this. I had dinner the other night with a fairly influential, like I was asked to help sit down with a fairly influential CEO with some other conservative media. And one of the things that I told them was, it's not one or the other, it's all of the above. Yeah. So you do the Washington Post and CNBC, but then you do Breitbart and the Sean Spicer Show, or Town Hall Media, or
no, Sean Spicer Show, then Breitbart or somebody else.
Right. And then come on the morning meeting. But the point is that you used to be able to have this singular funnel, which you could kind of walk out onto to what they call Pebble Beach, which is that driveway right outside the White House where you see Caroline Leavitt or a lot of administration officials. And now it's you have to go to different places. The long form, I told people this before, when I was at Newsmax, there was like a mandate that we couldn't have segments that were longer than 5, at most 7 minutes. Well, if you do the math, that's usually about 3 questions, sometimes 4, depending on the guest. And they're not real substantive. And Newsmax isn't alone. I just say that from having been there. But whether it's Fox or CNN or MSNBC, they're all the same. And the same thing with the newspaper. You're going to get a little tiny quote with 12 words in it. And when you go on a show where it's 25 or 30 minutes, you can have a discussion and you can probe the person and say, wait, that's interesting. Explain that. I think that they like it because you get to be familiar with the person. You understand their background, their motives, their authenticity, or lack thereof in some cases. But I think that it gives a different side. Government used to be very much just, I'm going to sit there, say some stuff for a while, you ingest it, and then play it for your viewers later. And I find that a lot of times, especially like even on this platform, you look at the chat, people want to engage. They want to ask a question. They want to do stuff. When I had Dershowitz on the other day, I had asked some of the chat the day before, hey, give me some ideas. Some of the best questions came from that, from people in my, my YouTube, my Substack. And so I guess the point is that these long form interviews allow the administration to present things that don't really occur in a 5 to 7 minute interview. And they're really taking advantage of this. And I always find it interesting when you look back. I think you think about the Pod Save America guys and whatever, and they did a really good job out of the gate. And then Republicans maybe were a little slower coming out, but now you look at all the top shows and they're all right leaning. And that just, there's been a full embrace of that. So I'm excited. I think it's a huge thing for independent media. There was a story in Semaphore this morning about how YouTube is really trying to become the place to go, and it's allowing what they host read insert ads in a dynamic way. This is the future, and I think they get it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that just stands out is the previous administration. We've talked a lot about Joe Biden's kind of inabilities, but another thing they struggled with was the cabinet had a really hard time penetrating the news. Gina Raimondo would go out and do a ribbon cutting or something, and the tree fell and really nobody heard it. And the Biden people were very frustrated. To your point, these long form interviews, they have specific audiences. Anybody who chats for a long time, you start to relax, you let your hair down, like you just become more natural and normal. And so I think it's strengthening these cabinet members. It's getting their message to a targeted, desired audience, and it's allowing them to continue this kind of, as you say, all of the above approach. And I think, hopefully Democrats are paying attention.
It was interesting, Dan, when I was listening to that Lutnick All In podcast, it got me to think about not to the point that you're making in a different way. I've always looked at it through the context of my old job, which is that, when I was press secretary, I literally probably spoke to the president at minimum of 10 times a day. And I know from Caroline, just having been over there a few times, hey, the president wants to see you. Can you run into the Oval? That's how it goes. it wasn't. And when I dealt with doing the transition with Josh Earnest, I think he had access to Obama, but it was on the calendar. I'd say, oh, 3 o'clock, I got to go and meet with the president. You didn't, and it's just more structured. That's how he was. But under Biden, I always said to reporters, ask Karine Jean-Pierre and Psaki before them, when the last time they actually spoke to the president was.
Yeah.
And reporters would say, like, why? Because they never did. They rarely they would speak to the chief of staff who spoke to the president, but they wouldn't speak to him. And this goes to your point. When you listen to the Lutnick thing, it's constantly, I said to the president, I met with the president, I talked to him for an hour. They feel empowered because the cabinet under Donald Trump is speaking with him very, very regularly. They're bouncing ideas, they're getting direction, et cetera. I don't think that, you read some of the anecdotal information that came out post-election about Biden. These guys didn't meet with him ever. They never got a chance. And so they didn't feel like they actually could go out and do something and say, the president's vision is this, because they didn't know.
Yeah, I don't think Joe Biden did either. All right. So I woke up the other day to the first lady, or I'm sorry, the second lady and Mike Waltz, the headline going to Greenland. My first thought was like, trollers are going to troll. Like I laughed at this. It incenses the Danish. Sean, is this Christopher Columbus, finding America here, or what is up with the second lady and Mike Waltz?
Well, I think the interesting thing is the Mike Waltz edition. When the second lady goes over, that's a very, it's going to be a nice visit. There's a signal they're sending when you add the national security advisor onto that trip, which is, we're taking this very seriously from a national, that's a signal. Yep. We're making this very clear that we have national security concerns about this. Now, look, always remember where's the deal in this? And my view is, I could see a very, very, the contours of a deal where they say, hey, increase your military presence here, expand the base, maybe some mineral rights or something like that. But I have a feeling that ultimately they're not doing this for no reason, because Mrs. Vance has nothing else to do. They're doing this to lay the groundwork. And I think the question is, what is the ultimate goal? And you never know with Trump, what's that deal ultimately look like? Because I think that if, as an American, I don't mind. I want our base to getting, our strategic presence to be increased, our capability in that hemisphere to be stronger. But I also don't want to necessarily own it. It's like Canada. I don't want it. In any case, I think it is, to me, a very strategic move, and we'll see what happens when that comes back.
I think the thing that is interesting, I kid and laugh at this, but as the Arctic melts, there is a race between Russia, China, the United States, and others for control of those shipping lanes and for discovery of whatever minerals are underneath all of this ice as it breaks up. And so, as you say, having some sort of bigger strategic footprint up there is in our national interest. It's just the little detail that the people there don't seem to want us, at least as of yet. So
they don't want, they don't want to be Americans. They don't mind us.
Yeah, right.
They don't mind our presence. We have it. They actually, I think, have offered growing the size of our military presence there.
Yeah. Well, maybe spring break in Greenland will become a thing. So this was an interesting recess here. We mentioned that Congress is back today. And, I wrote a Substack last night on this. Most Democrats who were in the news the last week, it was because they were getting attacked about Chuck Schumer or their lack of a backbone for taking on the president. But two members of Congress, the senior senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, and AOC, hit the road and drew massive crowds. We'll talk about kind of what it means, but, Sean, I think you'll be the first to admit, to get 30,000 people anywhere as a politician is hard. The only person that I've known who's been able to do it consistently is Donald Trump. Obama had a brief period of those huge crowds in 07 and 08, but then it kind of petered out, and 12 was a slog. So, to me, this is great. Like, I think the fact that AOC and Bernie Sanders, I don't believe they will be our nominees. I don't believe they will truly lead the party, but they are authentic. They are showing fight. They're taking on both, kind of Trump and their own party. Like, hey, you guys got to get in the game. They are showing that it is possible to kind of be bold and out in front as a Democrat, where we primarily have been in the fetal position the last, year. So I actually think it's great. I think they are tilling the garden that whoever our nominee is or the leaders in 26 can kind of take this mantle and kind of build on it. But Sean, what's your view of Sanders and AOC and their tour this last week?
Were you trying to imply that I'm an expert on crowds? And
I didn't even think about that, but yeah, sorry.
All right, no, look, I think the funny thing is I love this. The idea that Bernie Sanders is the biggest draw with AOC. I get it. I mean, to me, this is the fundamental existential problem, is that you've got a guy who is an avowed socialist that even in the interviews that he did over the weekend talks about, I caucus with the Dems, but I'm not a party. And he talks about the party being broken and doesn't want to be an actual member of it. So I look at this and go, and AOC, the problem the point that I would make to Democrats is, I get it. He might get you fired up and all this, but that's not a real solution, right? I mean, like, I'm sorry. Like, if you think that Bernie Sanders or AOC is your answer, God bless you. Good luck with that. But that, to me, is the fundamental problem, is that they are not, they are serious players in the base. Don't get me wrong. And I will get that. I give you that. And they draw a lot of people and they get a lot of enthusiasm, but they're not serious in their solutions. Right. And by the way, Ro Khanna, who was just on the show, we had him a week ago, basically doubled down and said, yep, our leadership is out of touch. Yep. This is but I feel like, they don't have a real solution. And that's going to be ultimately the problem, is that there's no one who can rise up and say, all right, I'll be the adult in the room with real solutions, real answers. I was listening to some of these people talking about how they wanted Chuck Schumer to fight more and get some. I mean, one of the quotes in the paper was, he didn't get anything for keeping the government open. And I was like what? What did you want him to get? Like a souvenir? Like a Trump doll? Like, what was it that you wanted him to get? Because these things, and having been on the flip side of them, on the Republican side, you don't generally get a lot when you're the people fighting to close the government down.
And I think, look, that's the issue of how Schumer handled it, and the fact that, as Pelosi has always said, like, if you want something from me, like, make me an offer. And I think this is where Schumer, frankly pissed away a month. So did Jeffries, not coming, to the table to say, here are like one or two things that we need to have, and telling the base, right? Like, this is the condition of our vote. The base wants everything. Which
what they got, though?
Totally unrealistic.
They got DC funding. So, and I'm not kidding. Like, they wanted the District of Columbia carved out for home rule. And I'm like, that's what you fought for?
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, to me, I get it. This is why I said before, I don't disagree with the idea that you weren't going to get much for this, but the strategy behind what Schumer did, if I were I'd be really pissed. I'd be like, you literally blew this all away.
Well, I agree. I think, though, but I do want to go back to Sanders and AOC. And that is that one of the things that we've talked about is there are increasingly Sanders voters leaking out of the party and going towards Trump. Some of those working class, union voters in the Midwest, the RFK vote that is not too dissimilar from the Bernie Sanders vote. And so I agree that Sanders by himself is not the future, or I hope is not the future of the Democratic Party as our standard bearer.
The funny thing is, go ahead.
But we do need to bring them back into the fold. I mean, I've said this before, and Sean, you have too. Winning campaigns both motivate the base and attract the middle. It is not an either or where you tell your base to go F themselves. And so I think we have to look at Sanders and say, look at that energy, look at the crowds, the way a lot of people, and this is little apples to oranges, but when Trump started drawing those crowds in 15 and 16, the number of people on our side who said, oh my God, this is the greatest thing that ever happened to Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party. And Republicans were like, my God, the base can't dominate us like this. But it turned out Trump had a kind of a magic of blending the two. And I hope that our future leaders can build on Sanders and AOC's energy and enthusiasm, bring some of these people back in, and have a more, I guess I'll call, polished message that is more appealing to the middle as well. But we need this. And I actually think it's great. If we had neither, we'd really be.
Yeah. I mean, look, you need to go through the family fight so that the tussle and the back and forth, every party does this out of power and kind of says, who are we and what do we want to care for? The thing that's interesting is the big takeaway, as far as I was concerned, out of that Sanders ABC interview, aside from the fact that he tried to get up and walk away because Jonathan Karl's a gadfly, is when he was asked what he could say nice about Trump, he said, I think he's doing a great job on fentanyl and the border. I was like, holy smokes, you just completely undermine. The problem is his big message is this oligarchy.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the American people are willing, in my opinion, to give a lot of latitude if they feel like things are getting done, right?
Yep.
As long as the bills are getting paid, meaning like, hey, stuff's happening. And right now the border is secure, fentanyl's going down. Like people go, yeah, all right, if this is what it takes. Not everyone, a lot, poll-wise. And so I think where Sanders, like the thing that I was so fascinated by is that he gives a huge hat tip to Trump on the border and fentanyl, which is a big deal.
Yeah, no, totally. And now we're going to go into reconciliation here, and we'll see if kind of the tax cut message and stuff perhaps is more resonant with the electorate. But you're right, Sean. Generally speaking, oligarchs, is a little cringe inducing, or more than a little, for some Democrats. But the last subject here, and then we're going to take your questions. So raise your hands. I see a lot of you have raised hands, some new people as well as some of our longtime favorites. Colorado. For those who have not seen, don't follow Truth Social in the wee hours of the morning, the president of the United States apparently does not like the painting in the Colorado State Capitol in Denver. As it says here, nobody likes a bad picture or painting of themselves, but the one in Colorado in the state capitol, put up by the governor, along with all other presidents, was purposefully distorted to a level that even I, perhaps, have never seen before. The artist also did President Obama, and he looks wonderful, but the one on me is truly the worst. She must have lost her talent as she got older. In any event, I would have much preferred not having a picture than having this one. But many people from Colorado have called and written to complain. In fact, they are actually angry about it. I am speaking on their behalf to the radical left governor, Jared Polis, who is extremely weak on crime, in particular with respect to Tren de Agua, which practically took over Aurora. Don't worry, we saved it. To take it down, Jared should be ashamed of himself. So, this did, I will say, as a longtime Seinfeld fan, when I saw this painting, it did, of course, bring to mind one of the great episodes ever, in which we got the Kramer painting and spent, quite a bit of time talking about. So, look, in all seriousness, I've said this before. I worked for Jared Polis. I was his chief of staff for a period when he was on Capitol Hill. Sean, to me, we just talked about Democrats, the kind of marrying the base and the middle. One, I think it's just unbelievable that the president of the United States is tweeting in the middle of the night. This is what is on his mind, but he has always been like this. But for Jared Polis, like, this is a little bit of a moment, right? It is not immigration or crime or like kind of substance where sometimes the party struggles going toe to toe with Trump. Like, Jared has a wicked sense of humor. It's very dry. I think people have been most effective against Trump when they use humor and kind of mockery and kind of just, most Americans, I think, roll their eyes at this type of stuff when Trump does it. I am really curious now how Jared responds. Does he step forward and kind of like troll him back and just, laugh it off? Does he apologize? Like, I think the base would love it if Jared would mix it up over a stupid painting. Sean, if you were press secretary, do you wake up this morning and say, oh gosh, or are you like, all right?
Oh God, no. This doesn't even rise to I mean, that's like, thank goodness he's talking about that. Obviously this is, as you point out, nothing new. The question the broader question that you're asking, I think, is an interesting one. What does Jared Polis want? Yeah. Meaning, does he want to be a hero to the progressive left and troll Trump in some way? Or does he say, Mr. President, if you don't like the painting, we'll take it down and we will try to replace it or something? Because I can see there's two ways of playing this, and that so but I mean, we can all admit it is a bad painting.
Yeah.
And I do wonder why. I mean, was the artist intending to try to make the president look bad?
Yeah.
So does Jared Polis say, hey, because again, I think this gets back to, I mean, probably you know him best, is does he want to be the magnanimous statesman kind of guy that says, this is silly, I want to fight over policy, and if he doesn't like a painting, doesn't like a painting? I mean, there is, like, from a tactical standpoint, you win a few points on a no-brainer, which is, oh, Mr. President, I want to, if that's, I want to reflect or whatever. Or does he want to be hero to them? We'll see how he does this, but or, I mean, because I think the funny thing is the third ground is just ignore it and get nothing.
Yep. Yep. Now I'll be curious. He's got a little, he had the RFK praising, and then the next day he kind of apologized and walked it back, which I think was the worst of both worlds for him. So again, I think Jared, I don't know if he'll run for president, but I believe he is thinking about it and certainly has a desire someday to give it a shot. So we will see. So with that, let's bring in the audience. We'll start, as Mark likes to do, with a first timer, and I believe Jonathan Schwartz, if I'm mispronouncing that, is a first timer. Come on in. You can unmute yourself, I believe.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yep. We can. Welcome. Where are you calling from?
Well, I'm a Hoosier calling from Germany, actually.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
I love the program. It's amazing. Sometimes the times don't work out, but what you're doing here is very, very great, I think. Okay. I have a few questions I've been thinking about for a while. The first has to do with Ukraine and Ukrainian aid. So I would have liked Mark's perspective on this as well, but I just feel like there's something that hasn't really been getting enough media attention. And that's how out of like the 150 billion or so that has gone and been appropriated to Ukraine. And I think a guest maybe even mentioned something like this a week or so ago. Like 1/2 to 2/3 of that money is actually being spent inside the US. So this hasn't really, I feel like, been communicated to the public. And I feel like if Putin ends up kind of dragging Trump along, which it looks like it is a possibility, given that after Putin and Trump had a phone call, I believe Russia hit Ukrainian energy infrastructure within like a few hours. I'm not sure the specifics on that, but that's what I read. So really, a stick that Trump kind of has is actually increasing Ukrainian aid. And a lot of this aid is actually being spent in the US. So my question, after saying all of that, is what do you guys think the chances are that Trump could actually pivot and increase aid? Granted that money is being spent in Arkansas, Alaska, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Texas, California. I imagine various Congress members are looking at this and being like, we're getting $1 billion for our state. The money is actually supposed to peak in spending in 2025. So when we look to 2026, the midterms, there might be an effect on that. So there's those congressional dynamics there, and I just wanted your opinion on that. Obviously, the counterpoint with Trump, with him kind of taking away the aid, there's the impoundment issue, and there's also how this is lighting a fire under Europe. So that's my first main question. I'll let you guys respond.
Sure. Sean, you want to start?
Yeah, look, just to be clear, a lot of the aid is where we're sending munitions in our stockpile over and then replenishing them. There's a whole secondary issue about whether or not we are able to, in a productive way, actually replenish them. That is a big problem right now. We're sending them weaponry and then unable to replenish it ourselves. So in theory, the idea is, hey, we're sending them a bunch of, rockets, and then we should be building them back, right? Replenishing the stockpile, which would be done in the United States.
And
the
those are
dirty
US
little secret.
manufacturing jobs.
Correct. The dirty little secret is it's not happening. We're actually very screwed. And I mean, in theory, that's how it's supposed to happen. There are a lot of munitions that we are unable to for production purposes. The demand is there, but we are living in a world right now where, because we haven't needed a lot of these things recently, that suddenly we find ourselves, it's like we have a supply chain issue, and that's a bigger national security issue that no one wants to talk about. So in theory, you're philosophically, yeah, you're right. We're sending them stuff, and if you're the congressman from, the first district of wherever, and they're building, a bunch of javelins, you should be excited. That's really not what's but it's not entirely how the process is working because of supply chain issues. I think the broader point is, at some point, if Putin pisses off Trump, you're going to see one of a few things happen. One, economic sanctions. Two, an increase in Ukraine, because he doesn't want Putin to look like for all the talk, what Trump cares about is being the guy that got the deal. And if Putin looks like he's taking advantage of him, Trump will turn up the volume. That's what he does to everybody, and he'll do it to Russia as well.
Yeah, and I think, you say that the public doesn't know about it. Look, the Biden administration had Zelensky go to Pennsylvania during the campaign to highlight the factory production in a swing state, in a swing part of the state. It clearly JD Vance brought that up in the Oval Office meeting, right? It was not, not noticed by the team on the other side. So I think Americans are aware of it, but to Sean's point, at some point there becomes a question of our own stockpiles for our own specific needs. And even the Biden people were saying that, there was an issue here, that we were bringing down low some of our supplies, and it takes time to reload, so to speak. So, I think these are complicated situations, and we'll just have to see. You said you had a second question. Do you want to? Is it short, because we want to make sure we can get some other people?
I'll try to get it out quickly. So my second question, which was inspired by a previous episode where I learned something interesting, was about the special envoy status, specifically with Steve Witkoff. How normally, I guess, for special envoys, you get 6 months. And I'm not sure if that started in November or January, but after those 6 months, you need Senate confirmation. So my question is, yes.
You get 6 months from January 20th, or the day you start, whatever that is. In Witkoff's case, January 20th, because that's the first day of the administration. The president can waive that one time. So in theory, you could get a year. Then you have to go up for Senate confirmation.
Okay. So regarding that, do you think that 1 year then is kind of the limit for Russia negotiations? Because he seems to kind of be the point man, partially on Israel as well, because afterwards, I believe he and his son and Trump's family are really related to this World Liberty Financial kind of group that is related to the Trump meme coin. And so after that period ends, he would have to release many financial documents that currently aren't being released. So do you think there's any?
You're missing option 3. So here's what I would guess. If there was a real concern and time was of the essence, and again, I'm not a lawyer. This is all new territory, because remember, Trump folks did this on the way out going forward. So we haven't really had a huge issue with special envoys yet. And you've got a Republican Congress. So the reason I say that is, 1, you could change the law again. 2, you just change the title. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know that you could do, but in other words, Steve Witkoff is the special envoy for Ukraine. And then on Tuesday, you make him the special envoy for Russia and Belarus. And he's, technically it's a new job, and the clock starts all over again. I only say that because there's a lot of lawyers who get paid a lot of money to be very creative. Yeah. So I don't, anyway, I just.
Yeah, I'll echo Sean's point. Where there's a will, there's a way. If he has a year to arrange his finances to minimize disclosures, this is not a partisan statement. Both sides do it. Rich people who want to serve are aware of the headaches that would be out there if they had to do disclosures, and they find very clever ways to move stuff around to avoid it. It's as old as the Republic itself. Maybe it shouldn't be, but it is. Thank you, Jonathan, so much for your question. Thanks for coming on and raising your hand.
Dan, I'm seeing a very strong lobbying effort on behalf of Jen from Oklahoma, I think it is. So I just want to, we can
I
put
was
her.
just going to actually, Sean, this is no joke. I was going to bring her in because the few people are more active in the chat, and give shout outs to people. And I think, call the balls and the strikes here a little than Jen from Oklahoma.
By
So
the way, I
Jen,
just had an idea. What if we start creating a morning meeting special envoy position, which will not
ooh,
require a Senate confirmation, some disclosure, a little disclosure that we would have to negotiate. But I think we could start conferring on people, show special envoy status.
I love it. And we need merch. And, I think you're onto something. Jen, welcome. How are you? Oh, yeah, you got to unmute. Oh, you able to do it? Oh, you're still muted. Uh-oh. Jen, if I try, nope. I tell you what, Jen, if you want, we can go to someone else and then come back to you. So
On
why
the
don't you,
bottom,
okay.
look at that bottom left, I think where it says audio.
Yep. And then why Jen works on it, Jen, don't worry, we still have 20 minutes. Rex Williams, I believe you are new. Come on in, unmute yourself. Let us know where you're calling from. Yep. Go ahead, Rex. I think I see it.
I'm in Colorado.
All right.
And boy, do I want to talk to you about Jared Polis.
Okay. All right.
Uh,
Where in Colorado are you?
I live in southwest of Denver in the mountains.
Okay.
So I can stay away from Jared. Jared Polis, it's been discussed that he would definitely like to run for president.
Oh.
During a period of unrest in 20, when we were trying to have back to blue rallies in Denver, Denver police just stood down and let rioters basically blow up the back to blue. And it's amazing that you could have the police department not take some action. And Jared Polis, when he was asked about, why didn't you step in on this thing? He said he didn't follow Denver politics. I'm sorry. That just doesn't cut it in my world. That doesn't cut it. The state capitol is here.
Yeah.
and the Denver they held this rally in the Civic Center. It was terrible.
So, Rex, do you have a question, or do you just want to? I'm good with you pontificating.
I have a question about Trump said that Ukraine started the war, and indirectly because they wanted to join NATO, didn't they really kind of jerk Putin's chain?
Well, I think I mean two things. One, I'm not as familiar with what happened in 2020 with Jared specifically. I think if that is the case, Jared and all Democrat kind of governors in particular who were elected officials in 20 who might run in 28 are going to have to answer for how they handled the social justice riots that summer. I mean, it dogged Tim Walz, and I would imagine Jared will have to speak about it, and we'll see what he says. I think you have to go back that Russia took Crimea back in whatever it was, 2014. And I think that, they had threatened to take it for a few years prior. And so I think Ukraine's desire to join NATO is because they saw this kind of menacing threat encroaching on its border, step over the border. And Russia was pretty open after they took Crimea that they wanted more of Ukraine. So I think you can't kind of fault them for saying, hey, wait a second, like we're going to need some protection. Like we cannot defeat the Russians on our own. Can we join NATO, which is what NATO was formed, for, which was to stop the Soviet Union from taking more of Europe. But on the other hand, the Russians Did they see that, as a real possibility, and therefore they put their foot on the accelerator to ultimately try to take over Ukraine? I don't know, but all of this, in my opinion, is dictated by the fact that Putin wants Ukraine and he wants more of Eastern Europe, and he's been pretty open about it.
It appears over a period of time. I heard about a thing called the Budapest Papers or something back in '96, where they said not one more inch further east.
Yeah.
NATO.
Yeah. I'm not familiar. Yeah.
And they picked away at it over and over and over again and added countries to NATO. And so, it's not unlike putting missiles in Cuba.
Right.
We wouldn't put up with it.
Right.
So,
Well, I think the challenge is, look, go back for a long period of time here. The flat farmland between Russia and Europe and Central Europe, let's call it, has been a point of contention for centuries. And, the Russians are like, hey, we don't want people inching up toward our border. And the Europeans have said, look, there's nothing to stop the Russians from getting to Berlin because it's just flat farmland with relatively weak military. So you're right. I mean, this has been a tension going back to Napoleon and even longer. But Sean, I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say two things. One, I don't think there's any question that Russia was the aggressor, number one. Number two, if NATO, every country has the right to look out for their self-interest. So if NATO wanted to join, I mean, again, if Ukraine wanted to join NATO, which I would think I would oppose on a lot of reasons, but I don't think that you can't attack someone because someone wants to join an organization, whether it's, it's an economic thing like APAC or something, or a military defense thing like NATO. So just because a country wants to do something doesn't mean that you can be attacked for it. If Canada wanted to join, an organization, the US doesn't be able to say, well, because you wanted to join it, we're going to attack you. So anyway.
Okay. I'll go with that. It was just something I was curious about because, it appeared that there may have been, a little bit of a reason that Putin went, I'm going to stop this right now.
He's been pretty open. He wants.
Yeah, but look, I will just say this:
Eastern Europe.
Whether it's domestic political violence or international, when you have a disagreement, you don't bomb the hell out of people and kill innocent civilians. It's just that's not how it's the reason I believe October 7th was an act of against Israel, and you don't. That's not how you settle your differences. There's many ways to do that don't involve killing civilians. So,
thank you, Rex. Thank you for coming on. Good luck in Colorado.
Love it. Been watching it since before the election.
Thank you. Thank you.
For Greta and Mark. So it's great.
I think Mark is listening intermittently, so hopefully he heard that. Sean, do you want to call on the next person, or
look? Justin has. We got to check back in with Jen at some point, but Justin's up this game. That's 2 dogs. If you're going to come with 2 dogs, you got to get something up.
Two's better than one, and he wants to talk taxes and SNL. All right, where are you going with this?
And then we definitely we need to check in. We owe Jen.
Yes, Justin, how are you? Welcome. Where are you from?
Good, thank you. I woke up at 3 a.m. from Honolulu to talk to you two.
All right, I like it.
It's not even light out, and this is Coconut and Peanut, and they had a question, 2 questions. So the first one is from Coconut for either of you about taxes. So I think we all think that the tax bill is going to be probably something's going to happen, but do you think it's more likely to just get extended, or it made permanent? And then either way, do you think that they'll lower any of the tax rates, or will it just be what it is now? And then my second question is for Sean.
So I think here's where this all comes into Washington gimmickry. Whether you use what they call current law or current policy depends a lot on so everything has to get scored. The CBO scores things, OMB scores things. How much do they cost? I am a believer that tax cuts don't cost money because they were yours to begin with. The government costs money to spend money. That being said, that's how the game is. And so what happens is the machinations go into whether or not something's permanent or the window that it's in, right? So a 10-year window versus And so I believe the goal is to try to find a way to make the 2017 tax cuts permanent, to add no tax on Social Security, on tips, etc. I'm sure there will be something added. I mean, this is literally like tax lobbyist Christmas, where everybody runs around and tries to get that small provision in so that, left-handed people who blink twice can get a tax deduction for driving a energy efficient car. I mean, there's a million people fighting for their little niche. There'll be something new in there by nature. And I think, like I said, the goal is to do that, but it's all going to come down to what there can be agreement on: the window, the permanency, the policy versus current policy. So all of those things are going to fake out, but the ultimate goal would be to get permanency.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, Sean's putting a really brave face and smile on this, but the idea that what Republicans are going to do is essentially say reauthorizing the 2017 tax cuts technically should not cost anything in a score because they are currently law is crazy. I mean, it's still going to cost us $4.5 trillion to extend them or make them permanent. But they are going to attempt to kind of wash that away and just say it's a zero out thing. I just find that remarkable, but it may be what happens. But they will add. I can't fathom that Trump, after the campaign, would not get no taxes on tips, no taxes on Social Security. And I think it was the auto loan that you could write off. An auto loan, I believe, was another one of his popular.
If it's American made.
If it's American made. So I believe those things. And then just as a former tax lobbyist, I cannot tell you it is. I mean, historically, tax reform of this nature happened once every 30 or 40 years. This is what lobbyists live for and what every company lives for. And every member of Congress lives for, because they all want to take care of their local industries. And to Sean's point, like where a comma goes in the bill can be material. So stay tuned. No doubt you will see.
Before you ask your second question, Vincent in the chat's asking why people call them permanent. It's because some tax cuts you can literally make permanent. You can write them into law and say the tax cuts, but in order to, as we said, the score, you can say this tax cut will sunset after 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And so these current ones will sunset because they only wrote them into law to exist for so long, because of a lot of times you have to offset them. So there are tax cuts that are permanent. There are tax cuts that are not permanent. It all depends. And it's the same thing with on the spending side. Theoretically, you're supposed to renew the spending and authorize the spending for programs. Unfortunately, that's not done for a whole host of things. But it all depends on, like, there's a reason we have mandatory spending like Social Security, Medicare, VA benefits, et cetera, because Congress can't touch them. They literally just exist. Same thing with tax cuts. Some of them are in perpetuity until changed by law. Some of them have to be renewed.
Yeah. And look, both parties do it. I mean, just in fairness to child tax credit, things of that nature, it intentionally expires because nobody likely in the right mind would let taxes go up on working and middle class people. So it's a gimmick, but it's an effective gimmick, and it's been going on for a long time. You had a second question.
I'll make it quick. Thank you. This is just for Sean. I think that one of the beauty of the show is kind of to hear the behind the scenes. And so when there's something like SNL where whether it's Trump or Sean, Melissa McCarthy even played you, is that something that shows up on your guys' radar? And like, do you guys talk about it, or like do you just blow it off? Or
what do you mean, you guys?
Well, when you're back in the administration, Trump or anybody else, that like the whole team, anybody that's brought into any of that.
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, yeah, I would have my DVR set to find out whether, like when you program, you can tell something's a repeat or an original episode. And so I knew if it was new, Monday would suck.
And what'd you think of Melissa doing you?
I think the first time was funny. It was sort of like, all right, dude, you deserve a little of this, like, well, whatever. And then, like I said, I'm a really funny person. But
I can attest
that, but I will say that I felt like there's a difference when someone tells a joke, like, is it funny or is it mean and vitriol? And I thought what happened afterwards, and look, it's a free country. Do what you want. I don't get, I mean, like, But my point is that I think that like if your goal is to be funny, that's one thing. If your goal is to try to be mean, so you know they have every right to do it. It's a free country, but I think they crossed the line of being funny to just trying to be mean after the first one. Like I said, that's their call, but I think they've really lost. Like they've lost. Like back in the day, a lot of the impersonations they did of folks were funny. And now it's all about like how to just literally advance a political agenda. And that's to their detriment because I think, like I said, and I'm glad that Melissa won an Emmy, you know, as me. So it's like I kind of have an Emmy, but not physically have it.
And did Trump feel the same way?
No, I think again, same thing. Once it crossed a line, you know, he's got I think Trump's got an amazing sense of humor. And he can tell some pretty funny jokes. But like I think he started to feel the same way, which is this isn't funny. Like they're being mean to us and trying to play it off as funny.
And I can tell you, I have never known a politician that I've worked for who's been parodied who does not pay attention. They're consumers of their image, their brand, anything that's said. And usually if somebody proactively says, oh, I didn't pay attention, that is the ultimate clue. They absolutely pay attention.
Yeah, I wrote a whole thing about this in my it was definitely a game changer in my life. Not necessarily for the best, but it was so.
Well, you're being very gracious, Sean. Anyone who's
funny and gracious. I'm gonna add that.
We've all been made fun of, and it's you know we all laugh it off, but then there's a point at which it's hard to watch, and few people actually go through it publicly. So good.
All right, thank you for getting up early, Justin. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Justin.
All right.
Mahalo.
All right, yeah.
All right, Jen, I hear you back.
Sean, oh, you're right, Jen, we're going to try. We're bumping up against time here, Jen. So we're going to just bring you on here as a host, not allowed. Oh my good. It must be Mark Halperin somewhere. That is just, this is.
Wait, what was the sign?
Oh, there you go.
There it is.
Hey. Good way to end the show. Jen, how are you?
I'm great. How are you guys? I'm here in Tulsa.
How is life in Tulsa?
Life in Tulsa is good. It's a wonderful city.
So Jen, what is on your mind? We are bumping up against time here.
Okay.
So we can circle back to you later in the week.
Well, I'm really wondering, why is the progressive left so intent on burning things down? Why is fire their go-to?
I think the progressive left is as frustrated as the right was 9 years ago. That there's just so much talk on the left about why we can't do things. How do we get to know? Yeah. And I think what they're seeing in Trump is just constantly getting to yes, right? He is not making excuses. He is bulldozing ahead. He is pulling every single lever at his disposal. And it's almost like jealousy. Like, look at what he's doing. Why won't you guys try everything you can instead of just, well, we had a bad hand. This wasn't the right fight. Not now, just constant excuses. And you kind of got it in 16 with Hillary being very timid. Even in 20, Joe Biden, it was such a all about Trump. Harris, we've talked about ad nauseum. So I think the party wants to be inspired. They want somebody to be more proactive. Sean, do you have any?
No, I think part of it is they believe it, right? And they're like, to Dan's point, if you guys aren't going to fight, we will. And that's so. I don't think they look at it like tearing it down. They look at it like fighting. And to the point that I made earlier in the show, I just say, the difference between fighting and winning are different. Like fighting and having an outcome is one thing. But again, one of the things that I think is interesting that they don't get pressed on is, what does victory look like? What is it that you actually want? And when you can't define it, that's the problem. When it's like, we just need to fight more. Okay, what do you want to get out of it? Is it just that you want to feel good? Because that's
like in the summer of 2020, they were burning down their own neighborhoods, their own businesses, most likely owned by Democrats. Now they're burning down EVs and charging stations that are definitely in their side of what they want.
But it's like we talked about with Tesla the other day. Tesla is an American company, which a lot of pensions are invested in, that are a lot of union workers, including
Yeah.
Tim himself, and yet here they are burning, going after Teslas.
Yeah.
The vandalism aside, crimes on those fronts aside, they're actually destroying something that benefits themselves, and they because
Right.
they're hating
Well,
you. So
it just kind of feels like I'm going to tell the world I hate the world by shooting myself in the foot.
Right.
I don't get it. I don't
I
get
think
it.
Sean made a great line, had a great line, which is that fighting is not a strategy. They're fighting and winning are different. Jen, we are up against time.
Got it.
We will bring you back on later in the week. We will
No
talk
problem.
we will
now
talk
that
to
you
Dad.
now that we got the tech piece down.
Yeah.
Love that. Okay. All
So
right.
affiliates, we're going to go just, short of a few seconds afterwards here. Sean, what do you have, or who do you have coming up tonight on the show?
Tonight, I'm going to do a deep dive on some Tesla stuff. Speaking of that, very interesting. I'll just leave you with this tip. Why do you think all the videos of people causing vandalisms are happening? I have a special sort of tech insight into some stuff that's, I think, pretty cool. So check it. We're going to do a deep dive on the Tesla vandalism.
Sean, that is a professional tease if I've ever heard one. Tune in.
Hey, ChatGPT wrote it.
Yeah, tune in for that. Here on the two-way platform tonight, a reminder, Meghan McCain's happy hour at 5:00. Her special guest will be Mo Kelly and the great Alex Eisenstadt. I downloaded his book this weekend, actually started reading it. Always entertaining. Meghan's show is. If you haven't checked it out, please do. And then at 6:00 tonight, Mark will have two guests, Beverly Hallberg and Brian Wolf. I used to work with Brian. For those who don't know, he was Nancy Pelosi's longtime political right hand. And when he left her and went to K Street, he was really her enforcer on K Street. I say all that with complete respect and admiration, not negatively. And then just a reminder, on Thursday, March 27th at 10 a.m., a private two-way event with David Bonson. For those who don't get Dividend Cafe, please subscribe. But David is a wonderful analyst of the market. We all have questions about it, and he will answer, hopefully, your questions. And I'm sure he'll have a great conversation with Mark. So a lot coming up this week. It's Monday. We will see where the week takes us. But as always, thank you for tuning in. Sean, we will see people tomorrow because it will be
at 9 a.m. time for the morning meeting.
There it is. All right, everyone. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.